AskReddit. Men of Reddit, what are the struggles of dating a very rich girl? This is probably gonna get buried, but I've always wanted to write it out. I was never sure how rich she was. I just knew her family had property in a couple places in the US and China. And this is also how I found out property in China is dumb expensive. When she went for the holidays, if she wanted to stay in Shanghai and then go to Beijing later, she didn't have to look at hotels or Airbnb, she just had to make sure she grabbed the right set of keys. It was weird. She wasn't dripping with designer clothes and drove a fuel efficient compact, but just looking at where her family had apartments/houses, I can only imagine. She was a super sweet, down to earth girl. Biggest heart in the world, very hardworking, and acted like a child in a candy shop everywhere she went. I think the biggest strain came when we would eat together. For me, money was tight and the best way to stretch my college scholarship money was to cook meals in bulk. Before she met me, she ate out literally every single meal. At first, it took some adjusting and rebudgeting. Bless her heart, she understood and found compromises. She loved my cooking and would surprise me with groceries and then say I have to pay her back by cooking whatever she wanted. Every once in a while she'd pick up the entirety of a bill that we were supposed to split, but she always found a way to make sure I didn't feel down about it. I don't think she ever once bought me an expensive gift. Most things were either handmade or were very thoughtful, for example shoes I'd been eyeing for months but couldn't afford, and she noticed them my computer browser. I miss that girl. I hope she's doing well. So what happened? It's complicated, but long story short, it was a combination of two things. A difference in upbringings and her feeling like I would never truly understand what that meant to her. Different life paths. One of us would have to sacrifice their dreams to make the relationship and the other person's dreams work, and that's no bueno. Pretending to pull out your wallet when it's time to pay for anything, then asking, "Are you sure?" LMAO. Very accurate. Yuck, that would make me throw up. After the third or fourth time I would feel sick from the feeling I'd owe them forever, or they feel like I'm a leech. When I met my wife's parents we went out to dinner. Toward the end of the meal I excused myself and went up to the hostess and asked for the check so I could pay it. Her father sprinted across the restaurant to stop me from paying. For Christmas, I got him a gift certificate for that same restaurant. It's a running joke now. I'm imagining a old guy running across the restaurant screaming, "Stop, don't pay the bill." That is pretty accurate. I believe his exact words were, "Don't take his money." I dated a pretty rich girl. Her dad was a prominent lawyer, her mom a successful artist, and her uncle was a 1980s pop star. Honestly, they were great people to be around. They were old money and not snotty or overly pretentious. Yes, they had a big ass old house and drove quality, not overly flashy, cars. Yes, they had whatever they wanted, but not at all in a look at me type way. I on the other hand was dirt poor. I mean in the early 90s. Grunge was a blessing for me because I looked like that already. But her parents didn't care, and we are always very welcoming. Her mom even took me to my first punk show. I guess it's true when they say cash screams and wealth whispers. My girlfriend, now wife, wasn't rich herself, but had very rich parents, both lawyers, one in family law, the other in corporate counsel, but they were pretty normal during her upbringing. The law careers and massive salaries came when she was a teenager. The toughest thing was that her parents would offer to pay for nearly anything, but later try to use that as leverage to control her when they didn't like what she was doing. She was college aged, so it happens a bit. Parents and teenagers aren't perfect. Things like stop paying for her car suddenly or reneging on a trip that they offered to pay for and she booked and was suddenly on the hook for the cost. It was certainly toxic from their end, and she kept falling for it each time. However, in her 20s, once she was out of college and employed, she didn't need their money, so anything that was offered with strings attached or had the potential to do that, she could just decline. They learned pretty quickly that manipulation via finances isn't a good way to foster a relationship with your daughter in her 20s. Her mom figured it out, her dad not so much. For unrelated reasons they got divorced, and her relationship is still very strained with her dad. This same thing happened to me. My mom used her money as leverage on me all my life. I was always scared to ask for money cause she'd use it against me at some point later, so I never did. I often starved and missed out on fun trips, and felt like a leech off my friends all the time for this. Anyways, after I got my BA and 1 semester of MA, I got a good job that paid enough to get my own apartment and pay for all my own stuff. So much happier to be away from her clutches. Kudos to your wife. I dated a senator's daughter in high school. Everything was about keeping up appearances, and we had to be careful where we went in public and stuff like that. Her parents offered to get me nicer clothes to wear when we went to dinner in public, but I felt weird about it. Relationship didn't last long. I'm not good at being political. I feel that this is a little different than the other stories though. A senator's daughter is very much a public figure, and you have to deal with tabloids, media, public opinion, and high chance of recognition on a scale most of the stories here don't have. My roommate was very wealthy and her boyfriend ended up living with us for 2 years, and I remember they would have the same fights all the time. He came from a very poor household, tough family life, in a not so great area of the city, didn't graduate high school, etc. He was supporting himself working as a bartender. Compared to his childhood financial situation, he viewed supporting himself with a steady job as being successful, whereas she was always wanting him to do more, be bigger, etc. They also fought a lot over birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, etc. She would buy him really expensive gifts that he needed, but couldn't afford to buy himself. He needed new winter boots and a coat, so she would buy him really nice ones for Christmas. A good coat and boots with 1 or 2 other items can easily get close to $5-600. He could never get her a gift of such magnitude. She was somewhat understanding that he couldn't pay for something like that, but he used to tell me he always felt a lot of pressure to match her really expensive gifts with really creative ones. He said he would dread holidays, Valentine's Day and birthdays, because he would get so stressed out trying to constantly think of creative ways to match her really expensive gifts. It seemed to me like he was getting really bitter about having so much stress over creating a gift versus her being able to spend 5 minutes using her parents' money to get him something. I think it was also tough because she wanted to do so much stuff and had the financial security to do it. She wanted to travel a lot and he just couldn't afford it. She would pay for him sometimes, but that bothered him. I met up with them once when I was living in Thailand, and she kept using phrases like "this is so cheap for." Like she would insist we got to the most expensive restaurants in the area because a comparative restaurant in the States would be way more expensive. She also had a massive inheritance. She doesn't have access to it till she's 35, but he used to tell me he was so bitter that he would probably have to work his whole life until he was dead and would probably never make enough to really retire, whereas she could basically stop working at 35 if she wanted. They dated for 4 years, but it eventually fell apart. I married one. Nothing to do with my wife at all. She's a gem. It's my Mill's expectations and image are always the center of just about every single decision. Phil, the real rich person, is cool as hell, though. Oh man, I had a similar situation when I was younger. She was just a girlfriend, but her mother was god awful, judgy, pushy, would trash talk the poor not knowing I was from a poor family, etc. But her dad, who was the breadwinner, her mom hadn't worked in her life, was such an awesome guy. People like her are trashy. They ride the coattails and think they deserve all the pride and respect that her husband gets. I dated a girl in college that came from a very wealthy family, Texas oil money, like. She flew from Dallas to Florida, where we went to school, in her dad's business jet. That kinda rich. I think the biggest thing for me was how out of touch she was with everyday money issues. For example, someone smashed into my car in the parking lot, and I was totally upset about it. She was like, "It's okay, you can just get a new one." She had no concept of how insurance or deductibles work, and she didn't understand that I could not simply go out and get it fixed right away. Another example was that she wanted me to go to Miami to see a Utah concert with her. She had like front row tickets. I couldn't go because I had to work. She didn't understand that my boss would not give a shit about how cool it would be to see U2. This was before they sucked. Let me tell a story that I think will provide a nice contrast to the majority of the comments here. This story isn't mine, but that of a close friend's brother. So Joe went away to college and met Sarah there halfway through freshman year. They were on again off again for a few months before deciding to date seriously in junior year. They met each other's families on vacation or when they would come to visit their kids at school. By all accounts, Sarah's family was polite and nice and relatively laid back. Not a whiff of arrogance or anything like that. Fast forward to the end of senior year. Joe's paternal grandfather is on his deathbed and Joe desperately wants to go say goodbye. However, they go to school in a small town with a private airport, think Cessnas, and the closest major airport is several hours away by car, and neither of them have a car. Said airport also didn't have a direct flight, so it would have been pushing 24 hours until he got to the hospice center to see his grandfather. This was destroying Joe, as he and grandpa were very close, and he was essentially a second father to him. Without a word, Sarah pulled Joe into a cab and took him to the airport. Waiting for them was Sarah's family's private plane. Joe and my friend and her family were all astounded. They had no idea Sarah's family was wealthy, and especially not private plane wealthy. Anyways, off Joe went, and he said goodbye and he flew coach back to school. Sarah never said a word about it one way or the other and neither did Joe. They are now married and both doing well in their careers, and from what I can tell live a very normal life. But every once in a while they disappear off to some remote island or jungle or mountain for a few days a year and don't tell anyone but their family where they're going. Nice story with a happy ending.